When Angela Dalton moved into Oak Ridge Preserve, she believed she was trading the chaos of her past life for peace. Nestled in a sleepy suburb with manicured hedges and strict community rules, the gated neighborhood promised quiet days, tidy sidewalks, and neighbors who waved at dusk. But perfection, as she quickly discovered, often hides right beneath the surface. Angela had spent decades mastering the art of silence, first as an investigator, then as a mother. She was precise, calm, and exacting in every detail, whether she was brewing her morning coffee or pruning her small flower bed of hyacinths. And that precision is exactly what made her dangerous to someone like Cynthia Maddox. Cynthia, the self-appointed queen of Oak Ridge, reigned over the HOA like a monarch in a pastel pantsuit. A woman whose sense of self-worth came stapled to a clipboard. Cynthia believed order wasn't just important, it was sacred. The moment Angela placed a terracotta planter on her front porch, one shade off the community-approved palette, Cynthia took notice. "Mrs. Dalton," she chirped one morning, stepping onto the front walk like a tax collector. "The planter's color isn't compliant. I'll have to issue a citation." Angela, kneeling beside her flowers, barely looked up. "You can issue whatever you like. I'm not removing it." The air between them tensed. Cynthia's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. A twitch, a tell. She wasn't used to being refused. "That attitude," Cynthia said with rehearsed sweetness, "won't serve you well here." Angela stood, slowly brushing soil from her gloves. Her expression was unreadable, but her words were steady. "I've served in worse places." That was the beginning. Within a week, the citations came like clockwork. One for non-regulation wind chimes. Another for leaving the porch light on beyond reasonable hours. Then a formal notice claiming her mailbox was 2 inches taller than allowed. To the untrained eye, it looked like bureaucracy. To Angela, it was war. I watched all of this unfold from a slight distance. I'm her son, Jordan, recently graduated and helping her settle into this quiet chapter. She never told me much about her past, only that she'd wrapped up a career and closed some doors. But I knew the signs, the way she scanned the street before stepping out, how she never sat with her back to a window. She wasn't just another retiree. And Cynthia had no idea who she was picking a fight with. The HOA harassment became routine. We found ourselves cited for excessive porch decor when Angela hung a small wind spinner. When the gardener she hired left lawn clippings in a paper bag on the curb for pickup, the HOA threatened a $100 fine for improper waste presentation. And still, Angela didn't yield. She logged every letter, every notice. She said nothing in return. She never raised her voice. She just documented. That silence infuriated Cynthia. At the monthly HOA meeting, Cynthia stood before a modest crowd of lawn-obsessed neighbors and declared, "Certain residents believe they are above the rules. That kind of behavior erodes the integrity of this community." Everyone knew who she meant. Angela didn't attend the meeting. She didn't need to. She was in the backyard, sipping herbal tea and listening to the wind chimes Cynthia hated so much. A few nights later, a letter arrived in our mailbox. Not mailed, hand-delivered. The envelope was cream-colored, embossed with the HOA seal. Inside was a new notice, pending suspension of resident privileges. According to the letter, Angela's persistent noncompliance had reached a threshold of community disruption. The HOA was recommending her access to the community garden, clubhouse, and pool be revoked. I crumpled the paper in disbelief. "They're treating you like a criminal." Angela gave a small smile. "People like Cynthia only understand control and fear of losing it. But this is nuts. Can't we just move?" "I don't run from small tyrants, Jordan." She said it with such quiet authority that I stopped arguing. But even I didn't expect what happened next. One humid Tuesday morning, Angela returned from her walk a little winded. Pollen count was high, and the heat had spiked quickly. She stepped through the door, pressed a hand to her chest, and whispered, "Drawer." She meant her asthma puffer. I rushed to the hallway table, her usual stash, but the drawer was empty. Confused, I checked her purse. The kitchen, her bedroom, nothing. "Mom, where did you last?" Before I could finish, she stumbled toward the door, her breath shallow, hands trembling. "The mailbox!" she rasped. I flung it open. Inside sat a sealed plastic bag containing her inhaler and a folded sheet of paper. No envelope this time, just a typed message. Unauthorized medical equipment was left in plain view from the curb. As per community safety standards, it has been temporarily confiscated. You may retrieve it after review. Oak Ridge HOA Compliance Committee. Angela's lips parted in a breathless mix of rage and disbelief. I grabbed the inhaler, tore the bag open, and handed it to her. She took 2 long pulls before collapsing into the nearest chair. She recovered, but her silence afterward was different. It was colder, focused, calculating. Cynthia had gone too far. The next morning, Angela rose early. She didn't tend to her hyacinths or check the mail. She went to the garage and returned with a briefcase I didn't recognize, sleek black leather, worn at the edges. She placed it on the dining table and unlatched it with a soft click. Inside was a slim folder, a flash drive, and a dark, scuffed wallet. I leaned closer, recognizing the faint crescent printed on the wallet's leather, a federal seal. "You told me you were done," I said carefully. "I was," she replied. "But sometimes it's not about what you walk away from. It's about what follows you home." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, sharp, measured, unwavering. And it's time Cynthia learned the difference between power and authority. Angela Dalton had never been one to act rashly. Precision was her nature. She didn't rush to confront, retaliate, or even speak out, because real power didn't require noise. But that morning, something in her had calcified. The confiscation of her asthma puffer wasn't just a violation. It was a provocation, a direct attack on her autonomy, her health, her dignity. And from the look in her eyes as she sifted through her old case files, it was clear Cynthia Maddox had pushed 1 inch too far. Over the next 3 days, Angela became a ghost in the house. Not absent, present in every room, but quieter. Studious, focused. She spent hours at her computer, combing through documents on a flash drive I'd never seen her use before. I caught glimpses, meeting minutes, neighborhood zoning laws, public records. One evening, I finally broke the silence. "What exactly are you looking for?" Angela didn't pause. Patterns. Inconsistencies. Cynthia's ego hides something. Nobody clutches power that tightly unless they're afraid of losing more than control. I leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "You're seriously investigating her?" "I don't investigate," she corrected softly. "I dismantle." I didn't ask more questions. I knew from the way she cross-referenced spreadsheets and typed with the confidence of a seasoned interrogator that this wasn't a personal grudge. It was a mission. Meanwhile, the HOA grew bolder. On Thursday, a formal letter arrived stating Angela will be fined $250 for refusing to adhere to community medical storage safety regulations. According to the enclosed report, her puffer, left unsecured and visible, posed a potential hazard to neighborhood children. Angela read the letter without emotion. Then she folded it neatly, slid it into a manila folder, and labeled it Evidence, Coercion, Health Endangerment. That same day, 2 more notices appeared, one for excessive vegetation density along her garden border, and another for a visibly offensive lawn ornament that turned out to be a small owl statue used to scare off rabbits. Cynthia wasn't just retaliating. She was escalating. And yet, Angela didn't blink. Instead, she began asking questions. At the corner of our street lived Gregory and Beth Green, a quiet couple in their 60s, retired school teachers. They were the kind of neighbors who waved from their porch and kept hummingbird feeders on every branch. Angela dropped by one morning with fresh scones, something she hadn't done since we'd moved in. Beth looked surprised but pleased. As they chatted over coffee, Angela asked gently about their experience with the HOA. Well, Beth hesitated. It's always been a little rigid, but recently it feels personal. We got cited for parking our second car too close to the curb. We've parked it there for years. Gregory chimed in. And when I asked to appeal the fine, Cynthia said we were creating a precedent of noncompliance. Her exact words. Angela nodded slowly. Did she ever provide financial transparency? Quarterly budgets? Expense breakdowns? The Greens exchanged a glance. Never, Gregory admitted. I asked once. She said that information wasn't relevant to non-board residents. By the time Angela returned home, she had what she needed, a seed of communal doubt. Cynthia wasn't just overstepping. She was hiding something behind the rule book. Angela called a local government clerk that afternoon. Then she filed a Freedom of Information Act request. 2, actually. One for Oak Ridge's HOA financial filings, and one for a personal background check on Cynthia. That night, as we ate dinner, I finally asked, "What if this gets messy?" Angela set her fork down. It already is. The difference now is I'm done letting her write the script. And the very next day, Angela wrote her own. She printed copies of a flyer and began discreetly placing them in neighbors' mailboxes. Community meeting, independent. Is the HOA working for us or against us? Let's talk. Location, Dalton residence. Time, Saturday at 7 p.m. Confidential. No Cynthia. It was bold, risky, but it worked. Saturday evening, 12 neighbors showed up. Some were cautious, others visibly frustrated. Angela welcomed them with quiet grace, offered coffee, and laid out a handout she titled HOA Red Flags, a legal perspective. I watched her come alive in that moment, not as a gardener, not as a retiree, but as someone who knew how to lead under pressure. Calmly, she explained that HOAs had limits, that bylaws could not supersede constitutional rights, that medical devices were protected under federal law, and that arbitrary fines without transparent financial records could constitute financial misconduct. She read a clause from the community charter aloud. All enforcement actions must prioritize the safety, privacy, and medical needs of residents. The room was silent. People glanced at each other. Whispers started. And then a woman in the back, Mrs. Enriquez, whose mailbox had mysteriously disappeared 2 months earlier, stood and said, "My son has an insulin pump. Cynthia told me to keep it out of view when he plays outside." That was the moment the room turned. Angela smiled just slightly. "Then it's not just me." The next day, Cynthia retaliated. She arrived on our doorstep at precisely 8 a.m., clipboard in hand. HOA badge clipped to her sweater like a police medal. "This is a notice of unauthorized assembly," she said coldly. "Per HOA guidelines, group gatherings exceeding 6 residents must be pre-approved." Angela looked at the paper, then at Cynthia. "There's nothing in the bylaws prohibiting residents from inviting neighbors into their home. You're creating division. I'm creating transparency." Cynthia's nostrils flared. "You're not welcome here if you can't follow rules." And that's when Angela stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and said the words that changed everything. "Then let's talk about your rules. Your spending. Your missing audits. Or better yet," she reached into her jacket and pulled out the slim, dark wallet I hadn't seen since she opened that briefcase. Angela flipped it open, just long enough for Cynthia to see. The gold badge caught the light. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent retired. Cynthia's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Angela tucked the badge away. "I may be retired, but I still have contacts. I've submitted requests for all HOA financial records and a background review of your leadership eligibility. You violated resident rights, federal disability protections, and potentially embezzled funds." The silence stretched. "If there's nothing to hide," Angela said evenly, "I'm sure you'll cooperate." Cynthia didn't speak. She turned on her heel and walked away, a little too quickly. Angela didn't smile as the door closed. She simply exhaled and whispered, "Game on." Cynthia Maddox didn't sleep that night. The curtains in her front window fluttered at irregular intervals, betraying her anxious pacing. By morning, the once impervious queen of Oak Ridge Preserve looked different, less polished, more frayed around the edges. And Angela noticed, but she didn't gloat. Instead, she worked. Quietly, methodically, like a sculptor clearing away the stone to reveal the truth beneath. By Monday morning, Angela's mailbox was full, not with HOA citations, but with handwritten notes. one from a neighbor expressing thanks for the meeting, another with questions about HOA legality, a third, longer one, signed anonymously, check the clubhouse maintenance contracts. Something's off. A concerned resident. Angela placed it in her folder. Leads. Financial misconduct. Meanwhile, Cynthia grew defensive. She sent out a mass email to all residents titled Clarifying HOA Authority, where she claimed Angela had intimidated her with a badge and was interfering with community harmony. The message ended with a warning. All future meetings not sanctioned by the board are subject to HOA legal review. Angela read the email with surgical dispassion, then forwarded it to her former contact at the DOJ with a short note. Possible suppression of community rights. Would appreciate insight. That afternoon, I found her reviewing a spreadsheet of HOA expenses from the past 5 years. She pointed to a line item, clubhouse repairs, $18,700. Guess how much the local contractor quoted me for the same work, she said. I shrugged. $5,000. $4,950, with upgraded materials. My eyes widened. She's laundering money. Not necessarily laundering, Angela murmured, but certainly siphoning it. It turned out Cynthia had authorized multiple emergency maintenance jobs, none of which were properly logged with the city. No permits, no inspection receipts. Just check after check issued to a company named Bright Pine Services, LLC. Angela ran the name through a business database. Bright Pine had only one listed employee, Richard Maddox. Her husband. Angela's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she clicked save. She's paying herself through a shell company. It wasn't just corruption. It was criminal. Angela compiled a document. Preliminary evidence of conflict of interest plus misappropriation of HOA funds. She printed 3 copies, one for her lawyer, one for the county housing board, and one she hand-delivered to Cynthia. I watched from the front window as Cynthia opened the envelope on her porch. Her face shifted from curiosity to pale panic. She glanced up to see Angela watching, and for the first time, she looked afraid. But fear doesn't always lead surrender. The next morning, Angela's garden was trampled. The gate to her backyard, normally locked, had been pried open. Her hyacinths, meticulously cared for, were flattened. Her owl statue smashed to pieces. Jordan called the police. But the officer, a young man who seemed uneasy, scribbled notes without commitment. No cameras. No witnesses. Hard to say if it's vandalism or an animal. Angela didn't argue. She just added garden vandalism, retaliation suspected to her file. But the assault felt personal. Later that day, she sat me down at the kitchen table. Her voice was softer than usual. There's something I haven't told you. I braced myself. I wasn't just an agent, she said. I was part of a domestic intelligence task force. Our unit specialized in corruption within civilian-run institutions, schools, boards, HOAs, groups like this one. I blinked. So, this is literally your old job? She nodded. I left after a case went bad. We took down a corrupt school board president who turned out to be tied to a local judge. Things got messy. Political. I wanted a quieter life. You picked here for that? Angela gave a faint, tired smile. Oak Ridge was supposed to be quiet. Predictable. I didn't expect to find a junior tyrant playing Empress in a cul-de-sac. There was something in her tone, regret, perhaps, but also resolve. I didn't want to drag you into this, she said. But now it's not just about me. It's about the people here who've been bullied into silence. That night, she held another meeting, this time in our backyard under dim lanterns, without fanfare. Nearly 20 residents came. One man brought photos of Cynthia using HOA funds to landscape her private garden. Another neighbor presented a statement from a former board member who resigned, citing irregular financial practices and threats of litigation if he spoke up. Angela listened, took notes, asked questions. Then she did something unexpected. She handed out copies of the HOA charter, annotated with legal notes and post-it tabs. At the bottom of each copy was a small slip labeled, Petition for Emergency Election, Removal of HOA President. Angela stood at the front of the group, her voice clear, unwavering. We're not here to cause chaos. We're here to restore order. If 25% of homeowners sign this petition, we can trigger a special vote. If the vote passes, Cynthia is removed and an independent audit is launched. The silence was followed by the scratch of pens. By midnight, half the needed signatures were collected. And Cynthia? She must have sensed it, because at 7:03 the next morning, a cease and desist letter was taped to our door. Angela read it silently. The letter claimed she was guilty of harassment, defamation, and improper impersonation of a federal official. Angela chuckled under her breath. She's desperate. But she didn't tear it down. She placed it carefully in a folder marked counterlegal threats. Then, she called her former DOJ contact. Time to escalate. Angela didn't flinch at the cease and desist. If anything, it seemed to energize her. By Monday morning, she'd exchanged a series of encrypted emails with a contact in the DOJ's Public Corruption Division, compiled a timeline of Cynthia Maddox's abuses, and secured a legal advisor from a nonprofit watchdog group that specialized in HOA accountability. She wanted a war, Angela said, sipping her coffee. But I played chess. That afternoon, she called a neighborhood-wide meeting at the community center, a bold move, considering Cynthia had banned her from using any HOA-managed space. But Angela had already taken care of that. 2 weeks earlier, she discovered a clause in the community charter that stated if over one-third of homeowners signed a temporary override petition, any resident could reserve the community center. With 42 signatures in hand, Angela now had full legal access. The meeting room filled fast. 50 people, maybe more. Some brought their children. Others brought folders, documents, and screenshots of years' worth of HOA grievances. The air buzzed with quiet rebellion. Angela stepped to the front, wearing a charcoal gray blazer, her tone professional yet unyielding. Tonight, she began, is not about drama. It's about truth, accountability, and community. She clicked a remote, and a screen flickered to life behind her. Slide 1, a chart comparing HOA dues over the past 7 years with actual maintenance records. The discrepancy was startling. Slide 2, a copy of an invoice from Bright Pine Services, LLC, a $9,600 landscaping job that was never visibly completed. Slide 3, a copy of the LLC's registration, with Richard Maddox listed as sole proprietor. The room erupted. Angela let the outrage simmer before speaking again. This isn't just financial misconduct. It's personal. Cynthia has used fines and citations to target residents who question her authority. She's violated medical privacy rights. And when I pushed back, she retaliated. Then came the final slide. A scanned copy of Cynthia's cease and desist letter, juxtaposed with Angela's official DOJ credentials. I do not impersonate federal officers, Angela said, voice low but powerful. I was one, and I filed a formal complaint with the county's Housing Oversight Committee. Someone in the crowd clapped, then another, and another. By the time the meeting ended, Angela had gathered the last batch of signatures required to trigger the emergency election. Cynthia, however, wasn't going quietly. The next morning, she sent out a glossy, full-color flyer titled, Stop the Chaos. Save Oak Ridge. It was filled with manipulated statistics, vague legal jargon, and even a veiled accusation that Angela had manipulated her position as a former agent to intimidate civilians. But the neighborhood had seen enough. The final straw came 2 days later, when Angela received a certified letter from Cynthia's personal attorney. It accused her of creating psychological distress and gave her 72 hours to drop the petition or face a civil lawsuit. Angela barely blinked. She's flailing. Rather than respond, Angela handed the letter to her new legal advisor and moved forward with the election preparations. Flyers went out. Transparent ballot procedures were posted on the community board. Angela recruited neutral third-party volunteers from the county to oversee the vote. Everything was done by the book. Cynthia tried to interfere. She blocked volunteers from using HOA email lists. She filed a complaint with the county clerk claiming Angela was organizing a coup. But the clerk, having reviewed the documents Angela had already submitted, dismissed the claim outright. Election day arrived. A makeshift voting station was set up in the community center's multipurpose room. One by one, residents came in. Some were quiet. Others vocalized their disgust over years of being fined for trivial violations. Flowers planted too close to the curb, holiday lights taken down 2 days too late. Even one woman fined $100 for hanging wind chimes that disturbed the uniformity of the aesthetic. By evening, the votes were tallied. The final result, 74% in favor of removing Cynthia Maddox. Angela didn't smile when it was announced. She simply nodded. It wasn't over yet. That evening, a small group gathered at our home. Angela stood at the center, holding a thick manila folder labeled, "To be delivered, County Board of Ethics." Inside were copies of everything: emails, invoices, statements from residents, legal violations, and the cease and desist letter. It was a dossier meant not for neighborhood gossip, but legal scrutiny. At 9 a.m. the next morning, she personally delivered it to the County Housing Oversight Office. Meanwhile, Cynthia had vanished. Her car remained in her driveway, but her porch lights were off. She didn't answer the door. She didn't return calls. Word spread that Richard Maddox had cleared out the Office of Bright Pine Services and pulled its business license from the state registry. Angela waited. For days later, a letter arrived from the county investigator's office. It thanked Angela for her submission, acknowledged concerning patterns of financial misconduct, and informed her that a formal investigation into the Oak Ridge HOA's finances had been opened. Angela tucked the letter into her case file. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And as we sat on the back porch that night, a breeze rustling the newly replanted hyacinths, Angela looked out over her garden and said, "You know what the real problem is with tyrants?" I raised an eyebrow. They think silence equals submission. She sipped her tea, calm now, like a storm had passed. But silence, she said, is just a sound before a reckoning. The silence that fell over Oak Ridge in the days following Cynthia Maddox's removal wasn't peace. It was the weight of realization. For years, residents had lived beneath a veneer of order, fresh lawns, symmetrical mailboxes, manicured compliance. But behind that perfection had been something rotten, and now exposed it stank. Angela didn't bask in her victory. She got to work. The interim HOA board, formed from 5 volunteers voted in during the emergency meeting, held its first open-door session. Angela stood beside them, not as president or enforcer, but as a guide. She helped them review every outstanding fine, every budget allocation, every bylaw amendment signed under Cynthia's term. The damage was worse than anyone guessed. Over $137,000 in community funds had been spent under vague categories like beautification and administrative expenses, without any paper trail beyond a few scribbled invoices. Several homeowners have been cited multiple times for the same violation, charged late fees that were never credited once paid. In one case, a single mother had her car towed twice for parking in her own driveway. Angela proposed 3 actions. 1. Hire an independent forensic accountant. 2. Reverse all unjustified fines from the last 36 months. 3. File a formal motion to bar Cynthia Maddox from serving on any HOA board in the state. The board approved all 3 unanimously. But Cynthia didn't go down quietly. On the 4th day of the new board's operation, she reemerged, storming into the community center during a public meeting, flanked by her lawyer and a clipboard of what she called defamatory evidence. "I will not be slandered by this witch hunt," she snapped. Her voice cracked, not with weakness, but rage. "You people have been brainwashed by a federal agent playing house." Angela stood slowly, arms crossed. "Cynthia," she said evenly, "there's a county investigator reviewing every check you signed. If you'd like to submit a statement, I suggest you do it through proper legal channels." Cynthia turned to the crowd for support, but none came, not even from the neighbors who once clung to her favor like lifelines. She left without another word. 2 weeks later, an unmarked car appeared at her driveway. Men in dark suits stepped out and knocked on her door. She didn't answer, but a day later, county records confirmed a lien had been placed on her property, pending a financial misconduct probe. Angela never gloated. She just sat a little straighter. Spring came early to Oak Ridge. Lawns still shimmered with morning dew. Children played without fear of citation. Neighbors began waving again, not out of forced politeness, but genuine connection. And Angela? She finally started planting vegetables in the backyard she defended so fiercely. Tomatoes, squash, kale, stubborn things that, like her, grew stronger under pressure. One evening, as she tended her garden, a knock came at the gate. It was Mrs. Elkins, the 70-year-old from down the street who once cried over a $300 shade tree violation. She handed Angela a box of lemon bars. "They're not much," she said, "but they're real, like you." Angela smiled, warmer than I'd seen in months. "Thank you." Word spread. People brought pies, cookies, flowers. Not out of obligation, but appreciation. Angela, who one intended to disappear into quiet suburbia, had become something else, a symbol. She turned down every request to join the permanent board. "I didn't do this to lead," she said. "I did it to protect." But the board kept asking her to sit in as a consultant, and she agreed, on one condition, that transparency and compassion guide every decision moving forward. One sunny Saturday, as we raked leaves, a young girl from next door ran up to Angela, waving a plastic badge. "I'm the neighborhood FBI agent today," she grinned. Angela chuckled, knelt beside her, and said, "Then make sure you keep the bullies in check, Agent." The girl saluted, then dashed off to patrol the sidewalk. Angela stood, watching her disappear down the road. For a moment, I saw her eyes glaze, not with fatigue, but something deeper. Closure. "Do you miss it?" I asked. "The Bureau." She paused, then shook her head. "I missed the mission, but not the silence afterward." And in that moment, I understood something. Angela hadn't just exposed corruption in a homeowners association. She reclaimed her voice, her purpose, one rooted in justice, but reborn in community. Cynthia Maddox eventually moved out. Her home was sold under market value during a quiet midweek transaction. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a moving van, a slammed door, and the sound of a rain crumbling to dust. The HOA's forensic audit was completed 3 months later. Final finding: over $200,000 in misallocated funds, several falsified documents, and a gross abuse of authority that endangered the financial and emotional well-being of Oak Ridge residents. Charges were recommended. Angela didn't attend the court proceedings. She didn't need to. The community's voice had already spoken, and in the end, that was justice enough. Now, every spring, Angela leads a community walk through the neighborhood. It's not official. No bylaws. No power. Just people. Talking. Laughing. Reclaiming the sidewalks once monitored for infractions. She calls it the unity loop. Because, as she says, freedom isn't just the absence of fear. It's the presence of neighbors who've got your back.